Los Angeles-based artist Dianna Molzan received a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and a Master's of Fine Art from the University of Southern California. She has had solo exhibitions at the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston, the Whitney Museum of American Art New York, and her gallery Overduin and Kite in Los Angeles. Several of her works were included in the show All of This and Nothing at the Hammer Museum, Los Angeles. Another Los Angelina, Alex Olson, she received her BA from Harvard University and an MFA from California Institute of the Arts. She is represented by Lisa Cooley, New York, Shane Campbell Gallery, Chicago, and Laura Bartlett Gallery, London. Her work is included in the permanent collection of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, and the Hammer Museum, Los Angeles. Please help me in welcoming Dianna, Alex, and Eric to the stage.
Okay, wow. Well, thank you all for coming out. It's so thrilling to see such a great crowd of painting enthusiasts here, and I'm just really jazzed that you guys are here and to share some thoughts about your work and what's going on for you right now, and in conjunction with our show. I thought, we're all stuck in the depths of winter here, daydreaming about sunny places. So I thought we could start our conversation about LA and where you're coming from. And I just wanted to begin that conversation with a couple images that I recently came across that I feel like, in a way, just kind of placed your work for me in that dreamy, warm, summery place.
Very warm. I was wearing shorts. I'm sorry.
One is this totally rad picture I found that Alex made of a painting that's become a really cool skateboard deck design. And then the other is this, and this is a plug too, because Kaleidoscope magazine really featured some thoughts from Bartholomew and I about the exhibition, but Dianna was featured generously in this beautiful issue of Kaleidoscope magazine, which has her looking fabulous.
Like I'm going to kill someone.
Against the Los Angeles backgrounds, like a femme fatale or something. So I don't know, I just wondered what's going on in LA for you and what keeps you in that warm, dreamy space?
Alex?
Well,
Maybe it's
Dianna
not so
just
dreamy.
moved into Clara Bow's old mansion. So
Supposedly, it's not
okay.
confirmed.
The headspace, I'd say. There's kind of these given things that people talk about when they talk about can people hear me? Am I talking into the, okay. The things that LA really allows for you it's financially more possible than, say, New York. Like, you can just have a much more, your quality of life is much better there. And then headspace. Like, I just disappeared for 2.5 months into my studio. Totally fine. It's the easiest thing to do. So that's kind of, and community with friends like Dianna.
Yeah, it's really nice because it's a very diverse, sprawling city, but you can completely retreat, which I guess is different than, a smaller city or a large city. It's just something about having access and then being able to very easily retreat somehow. And the weather is amazing, and just the vegetation. That there's a lot of it's an urban place, but it's also very much nature is a prominent part of life there. Yeah.
I always think I'm on permanent residency there. That's how I think of it. It's kind of bucolic and quiet. Maybe even too quiet. Like, you can really fall off the face of the earth and people won't notice because everybody, there's such a car culture, and there's not as much chance as in other cities. Like, you don't just bump into people, although we seem to bump into each other places. But, like, you always know where you're going because you're in the car, and so it's just this much more.
No chance meetings.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So, yes, you have a lot of control over whether or not you're participating or not.
And there's great tacos too, and I make
There's
you take
phenomenal
me
tacos.
to go get tacos when we come and talk about painting.
Yes, that is why I moved to LA. It's
There's the taco
food.
trucks.
And I mean, great art experiences there too recently. I mean, for me, just seeing, for instance, like the Ken Price retrospective,
Amazing.
or the Michael Heiser, photographs. At
Well, and
LACMA.
it's for like younger artists. It's just there's such obviously so many schools there, but then a lot of younger artists are choosing to stay, and it's you get all these different perspectives coming out of all the schools, and hopefully, sections of them tend to overlap, and you have these great conversations. And then because you can still rent great large studio spaces. It's just conducive to being a younger artist. And then there's apartment shows, like people are very willing to construct their own context to show work. And I feel like LA is very good about being non-hierarchical. Like if you have an apartment show, curators might come to it. In fact, they do. And it's like the community is small enough that people know about what's happening. Like we have a friend who does a show in his closet. No, it's his like whatever he does, his vanity. It's called the vanity or something. But people come to like it's
in his built-in
popular
vanity, yeah.
and people attend. And some of the best shows I've seen ever were in apartments in LA.
And is school what brought you both to LA initially, or?
Yes, Eric, it was.
I'm actually not asking that because I know the answer to the question.
I didn't move to LA to go to school. I had wanted to move to LA since the mid-90s, and I kind of was even debating whether I wanted to go to graduate school, and I applied maybe 2 years after I got there, so that wasn't what motivated me, but I was very happy it worked out that way, yeah.
And tell us about, your experience at graduate school in a way, because both of you have, painting in common, obviously, and were, self-identified as painters in graduate degree programs that maybe weren't as open to the medium or to your lines of thought about it.
What is painting at CalArts when you were there? Like,
Thanks for asking, Dianna. Well, I did actually go to LA specifically to do art because I was coming from New York, and I felt like there was a microscope for young artists in New York that I didn't think existed like in LA, and I knew like the expression, like I knew enough to know I didn't know. Like my work was so undeveloped, I wanted to go and hide, and that's what LA could provide. You could develop in private. So I ended up in CalArts really luckily because I entered as I was a fine painter, but I just didn't really know what the possibilities were. But CalArts, I'm trying to think of how to say this succinctly. It's well known. The faculty is actually very supportive of painting. It has a reputation of being this anti-painting school, except all these painters have come out of there. But it's really not something that the faculty perpetuate. It's just that the school is really well known for institutional critique and a very political dialogue, which I think is two things that are very difficult to do in painting. It's possible, but usually it comes out as very illustrative. And so, yeah, I entered school being confused about thinking I had to make painting function under one of these two headings, and then also just being freaked out about trying to identify as an artist now, and sort of feeling like painting was thought of as stupid, and I was so freaked out I was Xeroxing brushstrokes when I first got there because I couldn't like paint.
That's apt in a way.
It actually now makes a lot
relevant.
of sense, but at the time Tom Lawson came into my studio and he was just kind of like, oh my God, I think you want to paint instead of like, it was just me being like, I didn't know how to talk about what I was interested in because I felt a lot of pressure to talk either topically about it, which, yeah, I think it's much easier in general to talk about work that depicts a topic or is about a specific like incident or thing in history, whereas if thinking about the formal qualities of something, which I think is equally political in its own way, is something that people are almost threatened by, and it's much more difficult.
I wanted to go to a program that wasn't painting-centric. I mean, there were people that kind of worked in painting, and at USC where I went, There are 8 students accepted a year, so it's a very small program. It's also a very generous program, and there's an endowment that allows for really great funding. But yeah, I had looked at other schools, but I really wanted to kind of go someplace where there would be almost a feeling against painting, that to try and make painting succeed in a hostile environment. Opposition, I was looking for opposition, yeah.
Yeah, I think if I had been coddled somewhere, I don't think I'd be the same painter. I think it took having to really defend myself and try to find my own language for how to talk about the work that actually sort of made me come into what I felt was like my own voice.
And I guess I should say USC was not hostile.
For the record.
When going into it, I just wanted to go to a place that I felt like I would have to win people over that were uninterested in painting.
Well, yeah, I mean, painting can be a hard gig in that kind of environment, right? Where there's a kind of expectation that every painting should offer a sort of airtight defense for itself, and that it can't be open. And I think is that something that you struggled with?
I think that there's that, but there's just also, not the plight of the student, but as a student, you're expected to defend everything. And so it's kind of more the role of being a student than what people expect of painting, I think.
Yeah.
Did that make
it's
sense?
harder to be a graduate student than it is to be an artist. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess, one of the pleasures of working with Alex and Dianna is that they have studios just blocks away from one another, and you guys share your thinking, and Leslie Vance as well, yeah. But you guys share, your work with each other, your thinking. I wonder, how do you do that? Do you have conversations frequently about your work? How do you share your practice with one another?
I don't think they're really.
I think it's very organic.
Yeah,
we go for a lot of walks to walk her dog Lionel, and so we have tea, and then it's just organic. You're just talking about your interests in your life and what you're working on, and something interesting you've seen, and it's not sort of like, can you come over at 3:00 so we can have a studio visit and I want to critique? Like, it's not regimented. It's just kind of a nice organic flow of work.
Do you feel like you share art ideas, or are they very much independently developed in the studio on your own terms?
They're
Do you feedback to each other? No, I'm curious. I think there's a lot of connections between the work, but obviously, some differences that are important. We can get into those, but.
Yeah, I don't feel like there's, and I'm sure Alex doesn't either, I don't feel like I'm operating in a school of thought. I feel like when I'm in my studio, I'm in a completely private zone. I'm not thinking of what other people are doing. It's very singular, yeah.
So where are your art ideas coming from right now in the studio?
Well, it's not. That's a hard question. I can't. I can't answer that. I don't know. I was washing my dishes and wait. That's like the last talk. Sorry. Yes, I think that. I don't know. I feel like it's a little beyond my control, to be honest, to say where the ideas are coming from.
Yeah.
They just they're like brambles. They just.
So, for example.
Well, for me, just to dodge the question.
Bramble might be.
I find that so I'll start out generally with like the brambles or something like that, but then it becomes a lot of call and response and like reading the work and responding to the work in the moment. And I think a lot of it's very important to me to play in the studio, and I place a lot of weight on sort of letting the work take the lead, and and play and invention. And I think a lot of I can't pre-think things. I think a lot of the thinking comes through working and doing. So they're kind of they're intertwined. The sort of the creativity comes while making and doing. Yeah, I can't separate it from the material and the work.
Yeah, you both in different occasions have described to me your your work in a way as a kind of problem solving. And I guess just generally, what sorts of problems are paintings offering today, or for you specifically in the studio, and how do you solve them?
Well, I just think you have to, it's about being adaptable. Attempting something, it doesn't work out, instead of scrapping it. It's not like a larger picture, but just, it's really, just having to, kind of think on your feet, and if something fails, to not abandon it, sit with it for several weeks. I don't know, I think it's different than, like, what I mean is different than how you've maybe asked it.
So how did you mean it to me when you articulated that?
What did you mean when you asked me?
Well, I'm curious about, do you think of paintings as formal problems, as gestural problems, as sculptural problems? I mean, what class of problem does painting offer you right now?
Yeah, it's so vague when it's abstract. It's like, well, that's not working, but I can't. Maybe I could say why it's not working. It just doesn't feel like it's sitting right, or it's not humming, or you execute something exactly how you thought it was going to be, but it feels dead on arrival, and so it's like, well, nothing went awry, but it's, so it's very abstract. It's like saying, how do you know when a painting is good or not? You can explain it, but it doesn't really capture why that is. So I feel like the problem solving is, part of that, what makes a good painting versus one that isn't compelling.
I think, the compelling is the key. Like, for me, it's this, I've never made a painting that I set out to make, and like, it's the thing that Dianna was saying, like, if I pre-design a painting and complete it exactly the way I thought, it never has any life to it. I think that's because it's working with conditions I already, like, pre-saw and knew, and I tend to think of viewers and like very intelligent, and they can feel that in the work as well. And I have to have some sort of discovery, or like solve a problem within a painting that surprises me. And I think that then gets translated through the painting to the viewer, so that it then becomes something compelling rather than a known quantity, rather than being an illustration of an idea. It embodies an idea.
And something readable for you too, like you're interested in that process.
Well, it's just thinking about every single gesture and move and material as a sign. And so it's like, how do you compile these signs? And each time you lay down a sign or choose a sign, it then shifts the read. And then you have to respond to that to either complicate it more or like push it in various directions. So it's a call and response through a reading.
Yeah. And in both of your work, I think in very different ways, there's a way in which paintings often, at least for me, call to mind things that are visible or found in the world, whether they be patterns or textures or textile designs, or, to what extent is the specificity of reference important in a final work versus what feels, to me, something more dispersed in a way, a network of references.
I'll try.
Are you?
That one.
I don't know. I don't have a pat way of answering that. I definitely feel like that I'm moving through the world, and I have a certain, personal history and exposure to even like products on shelves, anything, just absorbing culture at large, and I feel like that definitely fuels the work. But it's there's also a certain kind of like mystery in why something, why I want to do. I can't always, it's not always, I don't feel like I'm logically thinking I'm going to pull from this and to pull from that, and then it's going to distill into this painting. It's just not, it's not very clear to me. I'm not trying to be elusive. It's just not very clear. But it's very strong, whatever it, why I choose to reference like, certain packaging of like a perfume from a certain time or a stucco surface of a certain color. They definitely are charged, but I can't logically tell you that this is why I've done it and why other things have not been included.
And I would never want something. A goal of mine is, while I might be referencing things in the world, and I think it's impossible to make any mark or any gesture on a painting that doesn't like look outside a painting at this point. Like I just think everything, I just think in terms of signs that, but I would never want it to be a one-to-one of something in the world. Like that's not a goal at all. Like if I want it to I want it to make your brain kind of activated in a particular way to start like wanting to categorize a read, but then really dodging the tight read or something. Like, yeah.
So I was reading this really great, to change gears a little bit, if that's okay. If that was a gear that we were in, we're downshifting now to something else. I was reading this great interview with Lee Krasner, and just like thank the world for Lee Krasner. She just started the interview with this really bold statement that all painting is biographical. Like if you just take the time to read it, and that a lot of personality is always inevitably going to come through in painting. And I wonder if you feel that way about your work. Is it autobiographical in a sense?
Well,
I know it sounds like a cheesy question and a
cheesy
really
question,
unpopular one, but I think it's actually kind of interesting in relation to the kind of work that you do.
mine is more autobiographical than I'd ever want to admit. Do you know what I mean? Like the way I think of, it functioning, I think, has a lot to do with just my general interests and preoccupation, and it does become very personal. But it's not, that's like, like the 10th layer in there. But it's, I would definitely call it autobiographical.
I guess yeah.
Well, in a way, you kind of answered it already. This idea of,
Just things I've
seeing things in the
encountered,
world, navigating the
Yeah.
world, and those come into the studio in ways, and then find their ways, however filtered, into the work that you do.
Yeah.
But is it readable in the painting?
I
way
don't. I would
Krasner
hope not.
articulates it?
I would hope not, because I'm really interested that when someone encounters my work, that they feel like it's a relationship with them and the object, and I want to be, even though in the making of it, it's just one of those very fuzzy things. I don't want the viewer to be thinking about me as a person, the maker, at all, whatsoever. Yeah. But of course, it's completely weighed with my experiences and observation. I made the thing, so.
If only you could stand by each painting
No.
and say, "Don't think about me, don't think about me."
Yeah, I like the devil and the angel. Yeah.
But I think, what Krasner is really articulating is against this idea of being able to read the subjective in the work, but actually reading the autobiographical, the idea of personality coming through in a painting.
Yeah, personality seems like a different thing to me than autobiography.
So how so?
Do you have a thought?
I mean, one thing that you both, I'm sorry.
No.
I mean, one thing that you both have also articulated in a way in the past is, comparing paintings, at least in terms of how we might relate to them as personalities or personages or
style, like a certain, like, charisma or sensibility. Yeah.
I tend to think of my paintings as functioning in terms of self-presentation, and that they're trying to project something out, but then it's equally as much as what the viewer is projecting upon them. So it's this kind of give and take back and forth, but they have a lot to do with ideas of self-presentation and sort of quick judgments and surface reading in everyday life. But that's not necessarily, that's not autobiographical. It's more about this outward exteriorness than trying to present, me-ness. Right.
No, I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking. I think personality is. Just thinking about an abstract painting and trying to relate to it as one might relate to a person is an interesting problem. And I think style is one way that you might approach it, or the idea of mannerism, for instance, right? Like a tick or something. It's tricky though. Is there? I don't know. Help me find a way out of this
Are you bridging somewhere? Can we?
No, I'm not. I'm not trying to like create a transition to another topic. I would like to dig
Let's
further
segue.
into the
Into this
personality
one.
of paintings, or like what gives them a certain
Yeah.
vibe or something. I mean,
Yeah.
I think a lot about embodiment and like
Yeah.
trying to sort of become something. I'm just throwing phrases
Yeah,
out to
yeah.
you now, but I also feel like the paint never lies. Like you can tell when it's really like captured something versus when it's like an illustration of something. I'm just really big on that. I'm trying.
Yeah, I
Mark.
always want my work to be very pleasurable. Like, I don't want it to be tranquilizing, but I want it to be very pleasurable. And yeah, so I guess maybe to me that relates to kind of style or personality, is wanting it to be rewarding, but to not rewarding in a different way that is heightening the senses and engagement. Like, I guess maybe I don't think that pleasure has to be dumb, or, that it has to be something to be
simple or-
avoided, that it can't be serious, or it can't be dealing with, philosophical content if it's also pleasurable.
And you think that pleasure really depends on the one-on-one, like, material engagement with the work?
Yeah, sensory
in the
engagement, yeah. Like controlling the, I'm not going to unpack
Are you
that.
talking in terms of making it or experiencing it? Like,
Well, I suppose both, but just in terms of, you were describing the viewers.
yeah,
sort
it's
of
it's
response to a
definitely
painting
about
and-
an engagement with it. Like I think of painting in terms of being very active and a very active viewing experience. It's not a passive. I don't want basking. I don't want, it's an engaged viewing and judging experience where you should be moving. Well, not should be. I would hope that you move around the work and
You're
come
so
in.
prescriptive,
I know,
Al.
and come in and out. And it's for me about like back to the personality. It has a lot to do with first impressions and reads, kind of like being subtly given over to second or thirds, and this constant sort of like renegotiation, which I think of as like a very active viewing experience. So yeah.
Yeah, or that you feel it before you know it, that kind of thing. Like, it's an experience that then becomes unpacked, but that you kind of know it before you consciously know it. Yeah.
And that kind of experience has a lot of competition today. I mean, like the way we, experience most paintings in the world is through images on our computer screens. And I wonder how you feel about that kind of competition, or the life of your work sort of in a more distributed and immaterial space. Like,
One can't control. I mean, the internet seems to be here to stay. So I don't know. It's just like the technology has taken a way of. It's just like it seems kind of. I mean, I definitely think it affects how one experiences real objects now, because, maybe if photography was once this other thing, and now the physical object is different because everyone spends their time in virtual space, so it becomes unique again or whatever. But, yeah.
I'm just always incredibly disappointed about how my work looks in any kind of like flattened. We have a phenomenal photographer that we work with, and he does he does as good as I could possibly hope for my work being photographed, but it is not. I don't think it's like photographable. There's no way a photo can capture the experience of being able to look 2 inches away as well as 20 feet away. Like you just lose so much information, the tactile, the
Scale,
the
I think
scale.
so.
Yeah, the number of. I mean, I don't know how many times you've seen an image on a website, and then you go see it in person, and it's either like this big or it's huge, and it's just it. Yeah, nothing can take the place of experience something in person. So, I mean, that's an obvious answer, I suppose, but it's just always kind of breaks my heart to just see the paintings reduced to JPEGs. But it's a necessary thing, too.
I mean, I think for a lot of younger artists, like seeing the work in a JPEG is one of the sort of tests, like the white wall test, like hanging it on a clean space and understanding it in that context really frames it in a way. But you're saying that you value, of course, the sort of in-gallery material experience of it.
Well, yeah, the material is a big part of it. So we're not making digital images. It's something, it's an object in space with a particular experience that's more in the round and has more to do with the physicality of it.
But it's awesome to have access, like to be able to see things, but it's kind of like a bootleg or, it's like it's, it's like it's maybe only 1/10 of what it should be, but it's better than nothing. Like
It's like a translation of it or something. It's like reading it in another language, and then you have to kind of come back to it
Yeah.
to fully understand what you're...
But I think you use the word competition. I don't think of it as competition. I just think of it as, like, I appreciate being able to see things, but knowing that they're, significantly diminished by doing it, but I'm grateful that I can quickly reference, things like everyone. Yeah.
So do you think, back to style, I want to talk a little bit more about style. Oh, you don't
Yeah.
want to? I wonder, one of the things, style is a really sort of taboo subject in a way. We're not supposed to talk about that in painting anymore. And I wonder, we just don't have the vocabulary, it seems like, right now. Like, either paintings can be expressionistic or they're minimalist or something. It's like we just don't collectively use our style muscle, our style brain muscle to analyze, understand, and experience painting the way I feel like we may used to have. I wonder if there's a danger of, in your work, or a question of something becoming too styled, too mannered.
I don't worry about that. I don't, because I feel like I'm all over the place. Is how I don't know if other people perceive that, but I feel that. I feel like they're, bless you, that they're very realized. I'm not doing a slacker thing. They're really highly rendered, but I just feel like I could do in the realm of what I'm doing. If painting is supposed to reflect everything that's going on, then anything can be brought into it and be fine. I just don't feel limited, even though I feel like obviously there's a particular style in what I'm doing. I can do something garish, I can do something minimal, and it all feels fair game, and yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I think in terms of style, so it's not even like something I'm concerned about.
Not at all?
No. No, I think, I don't know if this is the same question, but I feel like I can sort of explore a certain iteration of an idea about 4 or 5 times, and then I know it too well, and it loses its life. And so the second, I can't fake it. So the second something almost becomes too stylized or too recognizable in my work, it's just no longer of interest to me, so I move on to the next thing. So
Yeah, paint may be a better word than style, and
Yeah, and style can be useful kind of coding to
it's another
kind of corral
sign.
interaction with the work. I think that style is a good tool.
Yeah, it's really, just understood generally as something, style is a way of treating a kind of content. And I wonder if you understand in your work a binary like that between style and content, or is it something else?
I don't quite
say
follow
like
that.
a painting presents a highly stylized version of a biblical scene, for instance. It's like its style is something that's
Sure.
laid over, applied to a certain kind of content. And I think there's a way in which, in your work, Dianna, in particular, it's kind of foregrounded without that kind of narrative or
Right.
content substrate. Hence the question of, is there something too stylish ever in your work?
Well, I guess if I'm conspicuously using style, it's for a purpose. So too stylish would feel like I'm really trying. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. It's tricky.
Fair.
It's very tricky. But I feel like I use style purposefully, but that doesn't mean I'm using it ironically. It doesn't mean, but it's purposeful. Yeah. So too stylish, I don't even know what that would mean, because sometimes things need to be too much in order to get the idea across. Yeah. It does. It's not my personal style,
Yeah.
but then it is too. So I just feel like anything I would say, I'm just, flip-flopping. Sorry. I will only contradict myself if I try and answer truthfully. So.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, maybe we should open it up to questions from
It's
the
already that
audience.
time? Wow,
Well,
okay.
we have about 20 minutes, and we'll see what comes up.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we can look. We can look at images as
I
well.
was interested in your question about vocabulary and how you talk about your work. So if you're not using the stylistic type of works, when you talk to somebody and say, this is what I do, for instance, a gallery owner or something, what do you say? What type of words do you use?
I tend to talk about individual paintings, so it's much easier if I was to talk about a specific work, and I tend to talk about how, not in terms of, I'm not quite sure I understand what your question was, but yeah, I don't talk about it in relation to past styles or movements necessarily. I talk about it in the present and how I think it's functioning, like how, yeah, I just think I think of them as much more present objects than reliant necessarily on just a style or a past vocabulary.
But you kind of steal from painting's history. in a way.
Absolutely, as like a language and as signs, but then it's how it's functioning in the present that's important, not just a reference to the past.
Hi, I've got a question for Diane. You talked about not wanting to get between the relationship between the viewer and the object, and yet I so much wanted to go there in seeing your work, and to me there's such an incredibly strong narrative in it, and I'm wondering, do you simply not see that? Do you see it and you want to couch it? So do you want to sort of cover it up so that it's not obvious? To me, there's two very strong narratives in your pieces.
In the pieces here?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just like, I'm trying to understand why you would not want to. I understand why you don't want to give it away and make it obvious and make it not to have, so that the viewer doesn't have much of a journey to go on. But why would you want to sort of get between that?
Well, I feel like the narrative that you're talking about, I do want it to be there, but it's about kind of the object, that the kind of the cylinder one that is on the frame that, where there are shadows that are occurring, those are the places where paint has been built up. So it's not that I don't want there to be a questioning of decision-making or how the object came to be, but it's not autobiographical. I don't want it to be about, who's Dianna? Why did she make this? It's really about, when you come to the object, to think about the physicality of it, and maybe that there isn't deception in how the object how it's been made, that you can really read it, and that there isn't any, masking of the making. I mean, I would hope that even a person who doesn't have experience making painting can kind of understand the logic and how it, well, not logic, but can read it. So narrative is there, but it's narrative as the object, not, and maybe as a maker, but not me as a human who has a particular, life history.
Or story to tell? Because, like I said, I think there's two very strong stories there that I thought you were pitching
What do you
consciously.
think
Well, one was Georgia O'Keeffe, and one was sort of an Olympian Diana, with the columns, the garland in the hair.
Yeah,
the
Garland,
Georgia
yeah.
O'Keeffe colors and references, it just seems so much like her work.
Well, I do feel like there is a hint at all of these things, and I do want there to be associations in the Garland thing, especially, how do you make something a fancy, special site? You put garland, or you put a lot of, like when I think of the history of painting, I think it's the history of fabric and banquet tables and, copious amounts of cloth. That is a signifier that this is a special zone outside of the, so these things are, that you pick that up is valid, but it's not about me. It's about the things you just brought up, that it's, kind of pointing to indirectly all these other things that, yeah, so it's not that narrative isn't there, it's just not my narrative. It's my narrative of, it's my interests, you're seeing my interests and what you can kind of tell where I've been looking, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about my parents or, that kind of thing, which I don't want. So I want it to be what you're, taking from it, yeah. And that there's also not just one, that there's not just one accurate, or there's not just one well that it's feeding from, that there's many things, and that meant that, many readings are legitimate readings of it, and that it's about your experiences and the things to talk about these people because you've experienced their work, and then you bring that to it, so.
Alex, thanks. You spoke earlier. There's a few things that jumped out at me, and one was how you spoke of if you have an idea and you attempt to paint exactly that, there's no life to the painting. And you spoke of sensing and responding, and to me that speaks to listening into the field of possibility. And you also spoke to this idea of style, and if you sort of create something in the similar style 4 or 5 times, you're like, no, I got to do something else, which to me speaks of going beyond something that has become sort of status quo. So all of those for me speak to skills and qualities of an artist. And my work is with people in the business world, and I'm working to sort of bridge and bring some of that quality and skill of the artist into the way of thinking in the business world. And so I'm wondering if you can speak more to what some of those qualities are, some of those skills, because again, it seems to me that there's so much of this ability to flex and adapt that both of you have talked about, but what else might you say or share?
I'm a little intimidated. I try and answer that now. Well, this is just very personal. I'm not saying, people can clearly make an artwork that they've preconceived and have it be very successful. It's just, this is how I personally work. And for me, I think of us as, professional problem solvers. That's being sort of, just that's what a daily practice I said the word in the studio.
We tried to do the talk without saying the word practice, but
sorry.
I said it 4 times.
Okay.
So you're cool still.
Yeah, I think it's just challenge. I mean, I don't. It's actually not a conscious thing. I don't know if I could talk about qualities, but I can talk about just interests, and it's what drives you to stay interested and stay motivated and stay curious, and it's about discovery. And I think as long as you're being very curious and playful and active in the studio, I mean, it's incredibly hard work, and it takes a lot of, for me anyway, it takes a lot of time and just trying things and a ton of failure. I think that's something I became very comfortable with in grad school, because it was so much about just failure and accepting that as part of the whole process of getting somewhere. And for me, it's always I go in with plan A, and it's always not until plan Y, literally. There's so many layers of paint. Sometimes you won't be able to tell, but it's just, and sort of becoming more comfortable and trusting that if you stick with it and you keep trying different solutions, that you'll eventually arrive at something that is compelling and is sort of a revelation to you, and then that's enough to keep you coming back for more. Did I answer that at all? Can you? I'm kind of forgot your question. Okay.
Double thumbs up. All right.
I mean, well, one thing I think is, I just admire about your work and your
No.
practice is that, I mean, no, that you can begin, say, two works like the works in the exhibition, with just a simple proposal, but that they both end up taking just vastly different directions, and that there's a kind of leap of faith involved in that process of reading and evaluating and then continuing on.
I'm not often good at the leap of faith. Like Dianna knows, I get really anxious, and I'm like, it's not going to work this time. I'm going to fail. But eventually, I just had a body of work that I just made that was the first time where I'm like, this is really painful, but I saw it through, and you can lose courage sometimes, but it's worth the fight and the struggle in the end.
Struggle, Dianna.
Talk about the struggle, Dianna.
Hi, I was just curious how you each feel about your work being included in this show, and if you see your work differently, kind of when it's presented with these other artists and at this time and at the Walker.
That's a tough question. I feel that all of the work is really different in the show, and I didn't know all of the artists. I had some of the artists I had never seen their work before. So, I mean, it's wonderful to participate, and I just feel like there's a lot of variety within the material, experimentation of the show. But I don't know all of the artists personally or their work that well. I was educated through this show.
Yeah. I don't think I see my work differently, but it was a huge honor to be invited. Thank you. And it was, I love how it's installed. It's installed incredibly thoughtfully. But I think it was, rather than seeing my work differently, it was just nice to see what else other people are doing out there. Like, I don't think it's meant to be like a lockdown on anything. It's just like an open conversation, and so I just viewed the entire show as a conversation, and it's just nice to hear what other people have to say at this time. And it was great to meet the other artists as well.
Okay, that question was perfect segue for my question that I've been hesitating to ask I've been to all of the talks, and what I'm dying to hear are opinions and biases about the show that's in the white box up there. And I want to know if either of you, or Eric, you could go to...
Well, I like it
what?
personally.
I do too. But what I want to hear is, so what is the work that's got you most excited? And what is a work that has challenged you or raised the most questions? I just want to hear some feisty
Well, that can
opinions
be
or
the exact
biases.
same thing. The work, I mean, often the work that you respond to the most can be the most challenging, like that's what's exciting about a good artwork. And I think, and now I'm going to be diplomatic again.
I mean, they are not here as critics for the exhibition as freelance critics, but rather presenting work in the show. I mean, I would actually just turn the question back to you and have you answer the question and, maybe generate some further discussion in here. I
was wondering, because you've been to all of the talks, so this has come up. I was wondering if this is part of the American Idol culture, where there's wanting to have a tribunal assessment of everything. But I don't know we couldn't possibly answer that question. It's just an impossibility. I mean,
I just want to hear people talk about what you're excited about and what's challenging.
Yeah.
meant in like, have an opinion. It's meant like, I want to know what people are thinking.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable answering that myself, so I'm not trying to, it doesn't mean that I, don't have, feelings about that, but I don't feel like, this is, I don't feel like that's something.
We also come into, I think we don't come into a show, it's like we come in with our own practices, I said it again, but you come in sort of with your own work, and while you're interested in other people's work, you still have your own work that you're focused on, so it doesn't really, I mean, yes, some work can get me angry or whatnot, but it's not going to affect, not in the show, not in the show. But I guess, I don't go into it with a perspective that I have very strong opinions about my practice, and that's not going to be shaken by other work in the show necessarily.
And also be just so subjective, completely, like, artists have different interests and emphasis, and what I don't know, I'm just...
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that aligns a lot of the artists in the show is that they don't necessarily feel, and if I'm putting words in your mouths, you tell me or just respond, that one painting occasions a critique of everything that's come before, but rather that there's a kind of ongoing dialogue with a variety of different practitioners, living, dead practitioners. Oops, is that form
I'm
fair?
sorry, I feel like,
But
sorry.
and so I don't expect of the artists in the show to come forward and say this work must go like that. It's not their role. I think they ask more complicated questions than that. Well, I encourage you to ask a follow-up question, but maybe we'll take one from...
I'm kind of curious about that final step when you go from the final work in the studio to the installation in whichever gallery. Just what you guys look to see from that final process. Because I know, like myself, when I work with stuff, the lack of mess around my final stuff when it's put somewhere is enormously different. So you have that transformation from in the studio to at the gallery. How do you guys work with that?
Yeah, it's magical what happens when something leaves your studio into a new space. I think about installation is very important to me, and I think of it as another step in the work. The work isn't, it doesn't mean that it will always be installed the same way, but that it has to respond to the space and to heighten the effect. And so far I've had the luxury or the privilege to really be present when the work is installed at the times I've exhibited. But I think it's very crucial if a work is placed, like context, the work that it's next to, architecturally. There are so many things that can change the reading of a work, and I think that that's something that maybe it's not typical to think that painters should be concerned with that things it should be contained as a discrete object, but I think that all of that stuff is hugely important and should not just be left to chance.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important, but I also think of my work as discrete objects that can be like...
We're not the same.
No, we're not the same. Like my work is kind of this... it's flexible about how it can be installed, but that's not to say it's still incredibly important. Like if you put... I can't even think of like what worst case scenario would be, but you cannot lay it on the floor. You cannot hang it, like...
7-Eleven.
Don't...
Hang it in 7-Eleven.
Don't hang something like... touching it, there's lots, of course, how it's going to be installed affects its read, but the way I think of experiencing the work is less in relation to, like, let's say the architecture of a space or something. It is more about a discrete viewing experience, and as long as that's honored within a certain way, then I'm happy with how it's functioning.
I'm just curious about obviously your work ethic is extraordinary, and so your daily habits or do you just kind of look around, you know, I mean, or if there are any, do you work in the morning? Do you work at night?
All
the
day,
time.
every day.
No,
7
seriously.
days a week, yeah.
It's epic, but it's also, were you going?
You go there.
Okay. Yeah, it's epic, but it's also, not that it's always a pleasure, but it's just what the work requires. And honestly, I hope at some point I find a way to get a little more balance, because it's a little, I think I'm still hopefully figuring it out, but yeah, it's just, it's a lot of hard work and being present and making. Like, I can't sit at home and think about it and have it happen. So yes, you have to show up and just put in the hours. But that's also not to say that it's good to acknowledge like those days where like there's days I'm so off and I don't know what it's like with sports too. Like if you have an off day that doesn't make any sense, like why you're off. But there's a day where I can go in and make like a bad move on like just bad decision making, and I could wreck everything. And so I have to know enough to like step away and go home because for some bizarre reason I'm off that day. But then I'll be back the next.
Hi, I'm over here. So a lot of the discussion so far has been sort of more general ideas about painting in a more broad way. I want to hear, I guess I have sort of individual questions for both of you about your work. So Dianna, at least the work that I've seen in the show and that I'm familiar with, it's a little bit from seeing online versions. So Dianna, in yours, I noticed that there's often a relation of the sort of a exposure of the frame, or in the canvas sort of drapes over things, or if the canvas is its own sort of presence aside from being stretched in some way. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about those choices, about the sculptural nature of some of that work. Mm-hmm. And for Alex, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, there's often, it seems like, an interesting relationship between the factor, the surface, the mark, and then there would be like sort of a clunky sort of illusionism or like a shadow or something like that. And so I just want to get to direct the discussion a little bit more to specifically some of those things that each of you are doing in studio.
Well, I guess, yeah, the draping and the exposing of the frame, I was, there's many different ways that I approach kind of a conspicuous use of materials. But I kind of like, well, how much can you mess with painting and it still be considered a painting, So it's just a given that there'll be a taut, kind of rectangular surface, and it may be concealed to the point that you don't even think of it as being, canvas or a textile material. And to just activate that and really, if instead of taking what would be the amount that it would take to cover a rectangle, and instead I make it a cylinder and intersect it. It's just to kind of playfully and ask the viewer where their limits are in seeing something as a painting, because it's painted canvas. It's not doing anything different. It's just tweaked. So the work often is referred to in sculptural terms, but I don't actually look at sculpture that much. I'm very much a painter and thinking just skewed, that everything's just, if you just skew it slightly, all of a sudden it almost flips into another genre, even though it couldn't be any more located in painting.
And my clunky shadows and stuff, I tend to, I'm really interested in, like, my work focuses on the surface of the painting. It's very much about a surface experience, and so that takes two forms. One is often in a graphic, very blunt, clearly legible about how it was made. There's no trickery to it. It's very articulated, and then it's usually juxtaposed with something more material. So it's these two different signs colliding on a surface, and I like the collision because I think it asks, I think that you just said ask the viewer, and I think that's something I like to think of in terms of where the painting's asking the viewer to make a choice about which logic it's going to read, or are you going to, the person it's going to read. It's about sort of proposing these choices and that contradict each other, and it's sort of pointing, I'm hoping that it gets your brain activated in a way that you're conscious of how you're making your choices about how you're understanding what you're looking at. So usually they're put forth like or proposed in opposition to each other.
This is a question for both of you. Social media is kind of taken off for artists, a lot of painters in America right now. And my question is, how has that affected your work? And also, I've noticed at the show a lot of people taking pictures of both your works and posting them on Twitter and Facebook. And as artists, how do you, what's your response to that?
I'm so dim when it comes to all. I don't do Facebook. I don't do Twitter. Anything that would be happening in social media, I would be oblivious to. So,
But I welcome, I mean, I don't know anything either, but I have no problem with people taking pictures or circulating it. And even though I don't love how my work photographs, like, I understand that it is a form of participation, and I like that the work can circulate in some form. So I don't have like a definite opinion about it as a negative or a positive. Well, I guess I do. I think it's nice to be shared.
yeah, and I guess I do that all the time. I took like 100 images today at the museum, so I do it myself, but I don't share it. But
yes, you do. Not virtually. She
I
goes
am the
look at-
person who's taking the picture and then takes the picture of the wall text, and I mean, I spend time with the work, and I might be doing it for different reasons, but I am guilty of doing everything you just described, but not activating it on the web, the World Wide Web.
Maybe one more question.
This might be a little bit late, but I appreciate hearing you talk about your work, and I guess I didn't do my homework because I'm not as familiar with your work other than the pieces that are in the show. So maybe this is a question or a comment about the format of the talk. I'm wondering why we're not looking at more images of your work while you're talking, so we can sort of contextualize what it is that you're saying in relationship to your work.
Well, I promised Alex and Dianna we wouldn't have another shop talk.
Shop talk.
Where we compare and contrast paintings. But I'm happy to.
Suggesting compare and contrast, just
context. This, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Maybe we should. Should we look at a couple?
Maybe we should have a
paintings?
quick.
Should we have a quick run through?
Yeah, I don't think it was a. I don't think it was a.
I think we just got to talking and we forgot.
Our fireside chat got
Yeah.
away from the. So shall we run through, Dianna? Shall we run through some images first?
I think
Want
you
me to
should.
hold your microphone?
This is when you don't. This is when you know that I can't operate a computer. Okay.
Just slideshow it.
How do I do this? Oh, slideshow here. View. No, really. This is like, okay, let's get on Facebook and really like.
Wait, is.
I'm getting there, guys.
Okay.
I'm getting there. So we can look through a slideshow of some of Diana's recent works that were
This is,
presented
yeah.
at ICA Boston, right?
Mhm.
And that show was called Grand Tourist.
Grand Tourist, yeah.
And what's the reference of the title? Or you often don't title your work, or you leave
Right.
them untitled, but
Mhm.
so the show title takes on a.
Yeah, it's very significant, the show title, and just thinking of the Grand Tour and, just, whatever a young Englishman, not rarely women, that's not part of it, but just going to foreign lands and being exposed, like getting an education through being exposed to works in different cultures and then having that brought back and then informing architecture. And so it's that the foreign then makes something native. And I feel like I'm constantly just pulling from things that I have very little direct knowledge of, and kind of being excited about it or folding it into my work. So it's just the Grand Tour as being the tourist who goes and sees things, absorbs it, and then brings it back to their culture. Which also allows, for variety, I feel like, in my work. things look very different from one another, and that's also part of it.
And this is an earlier piece, but there's often an interplay between the kind of more structural play with the materials and then an interest in pattern making too.
Yeah, and this one it looks like a pattern, but there's nothing in it that repeats. So it's kind of also kind of gestalt things and how we read, how things are read, and that the one you just showed is actually really not a pattern, but because it has the same palette and they're of the same scale, but nothing actually repeats within that.
Okay, so we're doing the talk backwards here. So what's the best way to do this again?
Select all parts. Oh, but then you got the drawing.
Select them all, preview slideshow. Doobie, doobie,
Yeah,
doo.
please.
Shooby-doo-ah.
That's a detail, not the whole painting.
So the stretcher bars are often also apparent in the work, but in a way that they sort of come through a series of mark making.
Yeah, it's not stretcher bar for stretcher bar's sake. It is
Right.
stretcher bar for optical reasons, or if just by that was the process that made the painting, and then it then has a function within, how the layers are read. So it only happens when there's a point.
One of the things that always comes to mind when I see your work is that it sort of takes on the quality of something maybe misprinted or misregistered, or it suggests a kind of reproduction or kind of information that's being, printed out.
Yeah, I like the sort of activating that reading, because it kind of drives home the point that this is a sign and it's something that's meant to be read. It's less about it's less about sorry.
I'm sorry to I didn't realize I had spilled water all over.
It's devolving now, and
Okay. It's sort of pointing back to, like, let's say a brushstroke as a sign or something. Like it conjures up that read for you if it's put in a language that looks more like a print. That looked like Agnes Martin on the moon. That was painted maybe like 40 times. Like, seriously, there's so much paint on that. And it actually had a very jagged edge. It was all the scratching. And then I painted over it so many times the edges became soft. And then there's this sorry, now I'm doing shop talk. I'm sorry.
Do it.
There's this graphite oil paint made by Williamsburg. That's awesome. But it's useless, except it's very translucent. But I also like it because it reads as graphite, which again you kind of want to read as drawing, but that's scraped over, and it's so I'll have things that go illusionistic only if it's done in the most like basic means. Like, this is just literally scraping over. It's not fussy. It's just a ton of not a ton, but just scraping, and then it suddenly becomes this, like, image of the moon or some with stripes. Yeah, I use a lot of strange tools on my paintings, like lots of window scrapers.
I'm curious about this work.
This is from 2009, so this was early. This is a real throwback. I did a series of, I rarely do series, but and again, it was just 3 or 4 of, this is like right out of grad school, but they're paintings of posters based on actresses named Jane. And it was all about ideas of embodying performance. So it was like the poster as graphic design embodying a performance of this woman, and the woman as performer, and then notating the poster into this paint form, and then the brush strokes are performing as both brush stroke and sign. Anyway, and so I had done a painting called Poster, what? Oh, thank you. I'd done a painting called Poster Jane Birkin. I only did 3 Janes because then I also had to really respect the Janes. That was a rule for myself, and I ran out of Janes. I had a painting called Poster Jane Birkin, and then somebody asked me to do this apartment show in LA, and they're like, "Can you make a Jane painting?" Which is the worst thing you could ever ask in art. It's like, Dianna, can you make I'm not going to ask you to make a specific painting. So, but the show was called, it had a very complicated name, but the gist of it was the Hollywood Biennial. And so I thought, well, Jane paint headshots by Hollywood Biennial. So I made Jane Birkin. This is called Jane Birkin Autographed, and it's copies of the painting, but smaller, like headshot size. And there's 2 of them, and they were signed with like a faux signature, like a gesture that read as a signature. And there was just 2 of them because they were endlessly reproducible, but I thought 2 got at the idea that they were endlessly reproducible. And they're twins, they're not a diptych, they just have to be hung in sight lines of each other.
And these are other works that share the same title as the works in our exhibition.
Yes.
Your proposal paintings.
Yes. That's hard to see. This is what I'm talking about. Like photographing this, no, it's just kills me.
So that was a long way to answer your question. Thank you for your question about the format of the talk, and I'm glad we covered some good ground there. But on this note, you should go up to the gallery and see the work in person. And thank you to Alex and to Dianna for being here and being such good sports.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
And thank you.